Hey everybody, how's it going out there? Welcome back to the Stasis Point. I wanted to share with you all a book on the holy icons while we have been having some big representation in the Orthodox Christian sphere. I've noticed many Protestant people coming out citing their issues with icon veneration, which I can totally relate with because that was a huge issue for me. So before I visited my first Orthodox Christian liturgy, I read Saint John Damascus on the divine images, and that was a big help to me to give me confidence and that everything was okay with icon veneration. I felt very uncomfortable when I went, but nonetheless, I was able to walk in thanks to what I learned from that text. And today I have another good text with me, which is, I'll put it up on the screen here. This is Saint Theodore the Studite on the holy icons. I'm going to read some of this, and hopefully this has enough information. I don't think I'm going to get to the whole book or anything. If there's anybody that ends up popping in live, ask a question if you have one. But I just wanted to share some of this book because I have it around and it's on topic for what's going on out in the world today. So you can get that. These books are very cheap. And this one's like not even like 120 pages. So it's a very short read. And if this is what you need to get you confident enough to go visit a church, then you should probably listen or read or ask more questions. So this is Saint Theodore the Studite here. And I'm not going to waste too much time. Like I said, if you have any questions and you're popping in live, then go ahead and ask and hopefully I can get to it. But just going to start reading. So give me 1 second. On the holy icons. I got my copy from my church. I'm going to read right from the beginning. Let's get this history that it gives in the introduction. The years before and after 800 AD found the Christian Roman Empire hard pressed by new forces on all sides. The followers of Islam had already diminished Roman territory in the east and now ruled the three apostolic patriarchates of Jerusalem, Alexandria, and Antioch. The pagan Bulgarians were a continual threat on the north. In the west, the consolidation of Frankish power, symbolized by Charlemagne's coronation as a new emperor in old Rome, destroyed the theoretical unity of the political empire and foreshadowed the division of the spiritual world. These changes were reflected in the iconoclastic controversy, which involved not only the role of images in worship but also the relation between religious and secular authority. In these controversies, Saint Theodore the Studite was engaged throughout his life. He was born in Constantinople in 759 under the reign of Constantine V, the second iconoclast emperor. His education prepared him to follow his father into the imperial bureaucracy, but instead, under the influence of his mother Theoctista and her brother Plato, he retired with his whole family into the monastery life. As abbot of the monastery of Sakudian in Bithynia, Plato received Theodore as a monk and later resigned the abbacy in favor of his nephew. The two shared spiritual authority over their monks for 18 years, first at Sakudian and then at the monastery of Studios in Constantinople. Theodore and his brethren endured 3 periods of exile for their defense of Orthodox Christian faith and morals. The first and second exiles were provoked by Theodore's opposition to the divorce and remarriage of the Emperor Constantine VI. The third time, Theodore was exiled by Leo V for defending the veneration of images, the subject of today. Theodore would not admit that an emperor could change the decisions of the church either in regard to marriage or in regard to faith and worship. The next emperor, Michael II, recalled him from exile but did not allow him to reside in Constantinople. Theodore died in semi-exile on November 11th, 826. Perhaps Theodore's greatest contribution to the future of the Church was his work in reforming and organizing monastic life. He supported his brethren by catechetical discourses when he was with them, and by his letters when in exile. He wrote hymns for the church use, especially for the season of Lent. He and his monks are credited with introducing the minuscule hand, which was used from then on, copying Greek books. In theology, Theodore's main effort was the defense of icons. The largest part of his published works may be found in volume 99 of Migne's Patrologia Graeca. The Church has usually made explicit formulations of doctrine only when forced to do so by the pressures of controversy. That's interesting. The Church has usually made explicit formulations of doctrine only when forced to do so by the pressures of controversy. Interesting. For this reason, dogmatic decisions tend to be formed by opposition with the arguments of the adversaries. This is very important for people to see that. This is true not only of the early council's teachings on Trinitarian theology and Christology, but equally of the defense of icons. The arguments in favor of icons were developed in reaction to iconoclastic criticisms. The first round of the controversy in the 8th century brought out the basic objections to icon veneration. These in turn called forth an Orthodox response, most prominently from Saint John Damascus. The second generation of iconoclasts, especially the Emperor Constantine V and the Council of 754, refined their arguments with the subtler appeal to Christology. Saint Theodore the Studite and his contemporaries turned the Christological argument to the advantage of icon veneration. In Theodore's works, we find both a review of the older arguments and a fuller treatment of the issues which had more recently become prominent. Hold on one second, everybody. Sorry. The obvious starting point for an attack on icons was and is the second commandment prohibiting graven images. The iconoclasts related that this prohibition to the invisibility and incomprehensibility of God, referring to the fact that Moses heard God's voice but saw no form. They also claimed that the superiority of spirit to matter made it inappropriate to use material images in spiritual worship. Their disdain for matter suggests that they were influenced as much by pagan Neoplatonism as by the Hebrew tradition. The Orthodox answers to these criticisms were formulated by Saint John of Damascus and inherited by Theodore. In the Old Testament itself, they could cite instances in which God instructed men to fashion images, such as the cherubim adorning the ark and the bronze serpent which healed the snakebite victims. Of course, their chief argument was the fact of the incarnation, although God in himself could certainly not be portrayed. God incarnate was seen and could be shown in a picture. The only difficulty in the depiction would be the difficulty inherent in the incarnation itself. One more problem raised by the iconoclasts was that of how an image is related to its original. The iconoclasts asserted that a true image must have the same essence as its original, like Christ and the Father. If a person venerates a purported image, he is guilty, in their view, of worshiping as God a thing which is not God, that is, of idolatry. John of Damascus mentions that there are differences between the image and its prototype, but does not discuss the relationship in detail. He distinguishes different kinds of images and different kinds of veneration. In particular, he distinguishes the absolute worship or adoration which is due to God alone from the relative veneration which may be offered to the saints, to holy objects and places, and to persons in authority over us. The saints are venerated because they have been deified by grace, and the grace remains to make their relics and images venerable also. Both parties to the controversy used the argument from tradition, that is, what the Church has done in the past must be right. However, neither the history of ecclesiastical art nor the testimony of the Fathers provided unqualified support for one side or the other. Art in the early Church was often symbolic rather than properly figurative. For example, Christ represented as a lamb or the Good Shepherd. Some patristic writings were critical of iconography. John, followed by Theodore, calls spurious a work of Saint Epiphanius of Cyprus which forbids images. In the first phase of the controversy, the Orthodox were more successful than the iconoclasts in justifying their position theologically. The second phase began when the Emperor Constantine V, Copronymus, presented his iconoclastic treatise to the council, which he called in 754. His main points were adopted by the council. They replied to the incarnational argument for icons by proposing a Christological dilemma. In a portrait of Christ, either the divine nature is portrayed along with the human nature or it is not. Divinity cannot be portrayed. Either the divine nature is confused with the human nature, which is monophysitism, or else, if the human nature alone is portrayed, the two natures are separated, which is Nestorianism. The Council of 754 also maintained the iconoclast position that a true image must be of the same essence with its prototype. Consequently, they asserted that the only valid image of Christ would be the Eucharistic gifts. A pictorial representation obviously would not have the same essence as its prototype. In the first treatise of his work on the holy icons or refutations of the iconoclasts, Saint Theodore the Studite repeats the arguments which he inherited from the preceding generation and deals more thoroughly with the new objections raised by the iconoclastic council. He replies to their dilemma with his own dilemma. If Christ cannot be portrayed, then he either lacks a genuine human nature, which is Docetism, or his human nature is submerged in his divinity, which is Monophysitism. The Council of Chalcedon, 451, had held that Christ was in two natures without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. If Christ's human nature is not changed or confused with his divine nature, then he must be able to be portrayed like any human being. If his two natures are not separated, then the one portrayed must be the incarnate God. Even though the divine nature itself cannot be portrayed. Indeed, it is not a nature which can be portrayed, whether divine or human, but a hypostasis. According to Orthodox teaching, the Logos assumed human nature in general, not a human hypostasis. We'll just say it like that. In other words, there is no man, Jesus, apart from the incarnate God. Therefore, Christ's human nature cannot be portrayed as nature, but only as it occurs in the hypostasis, which combines the two natures. And in this hypostasis, Christ's humanity has the properties of an individual man, including a particular appearance which was seen and can be portrayed. In answer to the iconoclast, understanding of the meaning of an image, Theodore elaborates on the relation of the image to its prototype. The image belongs to the Aristotelian category of relative things, and so it directs the attention from itself to its prototype. The image and the prototype differ in essence, but share the same likeness and are called by the same name. Insofar as the image is like its prototype, the prototype may be venerated in the image. The nature of the image, wood, paint, etc., is not venerated, but only the likeness of the prototype which appears in the image. The Eucharistic gifts, which alone are recognized as a true image of Christ by the iconoclasts, are, according to Theodore, not an image at all, but the reality of Christ's body and blood. He finds a closer analogy for the veneration of icons and the veneration of other material objects. Even the iconoclasts honored the symbol of the cross, the book of the Gospels, and other sacred objects. Theodore accuses them of inconsistency in refusing to venerate also with the icons. Theodore deals further with the correctness of venerating icons in his second treatise, which is concerned with the two types of moderate iconoclasts. Some of them admitted that pictures could be made of Christ and the saints, but not that the images could be venerated. Others admitted that Christ could be portrayed as he appeared before his passion, but not as he was after his resurrection. Theodore argues that Christ can be the prototype of an image because of his humanity. He quotes Saint Basil the Great, who says, "The honor given to the image passes over to the prototype." In saying this, Basil was using the emperor's portrait as an analogy for Christ as the image of the Father, to suggest how Christ can share the worship due to God. Theodore has thus borrowed an argument from Trinitarian theology for the doctrine of icons. He admits this and points out that his use of the comparison is closer than Basil's. The fact that Basil uses the word honor leads Theodore to discuss at some length the relation of veneration with honor and then with holiness. He argues that anything which is honorable, holy, or august must be in some degree venerable. If this seems to be a quibble about words, there is a real question. What kind of honor we may properly give to images to the cross? The moderate iconoclasts would allow pictures to be placed high on the walls of churches to be honored for their educational value, but not to be touched or kissed. This view has frequently been expressed by Western Christian writers from St. Gregory the Great to the present. Theodore, however, finds it inconsistent to kiss the cross and the gospel book, but to gaze at the icons only from a distance. Later in the second treatise, Theodore takes up arguments of those who would allow pictures of Christ only before his passion. He points out that even after the resurrection, Christ appeared as a man, ate fish, and was touched by St. Thomas. Even before the passion, he walked on water and was transfigured. So there is no biblical justification for saying that Christ was able to be portrayed at one time but not another. Theodore's third treatise reviews the whole case for icon veneration in the form of a series of syllogisms classified under 4 headings. Part A deals with the possibility of portraying Christ in the body, using primarily arguments from Christology, with support from biblical text, grammar, geometry, and philosophy. The essential point remains that because Christ has a genuine human nature, he must be circumscribed, and therefore portrayable like any human being. In Part B, Theodore summarizes his argument on the meaning of an artificial image, which shares the likeness but not the essence of its prototype. Hence, Christ's likeness can be seen in his image, or likeness of the image in him. Part C expounds the consequence that Christ's likeness, which is venerable in him himself, is also venerable in the image, since it is the same likeness. The identity of likeness and veneration is further discussed in Part D. The iconoclastic controversy, like other theological controversies, required precise distinctions in terminology. These distinctions must be maintained by the translator. Theodore borrowed some technical terms from the Christological controversies, for example, essence, nature, hypostasis, person. Even theology has a technical sense, referring to the doctrine of God himself, in himself, opposed to economy or dispensation, which refers to God's dealings with the world. In Orthodox doctrine, God has one essence, one nature, 3 hypostases. Three persons, Christ and the Spirit have the same essence as the Father. Christ has two natures in one hypostasis and one person. In contrast, the Monophysites, non-Chalcedonians, say one nature, while the Nestorians, non-Ephesians, say two hypostases, but one person. On the subject of images, the iconoclasts wanted an image to have the same essence with its prototype. Theodore declares that the image differs in essence but bears the likeness of the hypostases of its prototype. In discussing icons, Theodore uses a series of approximate synonyms without making technical distinctions among them: image or icon, likeness, appearance, symbol, representation, form or shape, figure, imprint, character, etc. It has not been possible to achieve complete consistency in translating these words. Because of the various ranges of Greek and English usage, in particular, may vary from image in an abstract sense to image in a concrete sense, a material picture, to icon in the technical ecclesiastical sense. For the response to images, Theodore, like John of Damascus, does make a careful distinction, which was missed by the contemporary Latins, apparently because of an inadequate translation. Worship, properly speaking, or adoration, is due to God alone. Veneration, in general, may be offered to respected individuals, relics or saints, or relics of saints or other holy objects, including the icons. Both words occur in biblical references where this translation has tried to represent them consistently. In other cases, also, the exigency of the argument or the use of the Septuagint text has required a departure. One second. From the Revised Standard Version, which has ordinarily been used for biblical quotations. In general, the translation has been made from the text of Sirmond as published in Migne, the Prtologia Graeca, volume 99, collection 328 through 436. Oh, sorry, guys. Antiretiki adversus iconomachos. Evident misprints have been corrected where necessary. Subtitles have been added by the translator. To many modern Christians, the question of icon veneration may seem a marginal issue in theology. To Saint Theodore, it was clear that iconoclasm is a serious error which alienates its followers from God as much as any other heresy. That sentence is very important because that icon veneration is one of the things that completely blocked myself from walking into a church. It's what's bothering Tucker Carlson. It's what's bothering many Protestants. So this is not a minor issue, and so we need to go back into these patristic texts like this because, like Jay Dyer said it, we don't have to redo this whole controversy. Everything's been settled, and we need to review the ecumenical councils and all this good stuff because most people, they just need to know that this information is out here, and instead of trying to recreate the wheel. That is to say, an iconoclast effectively denies God's incarnation, which alone makes human salvation possible. If Christ could not be portrayed both before and after his resurrection, then he was not truly man. Humanity was not truly united with God, and no human beings could expect to become partakers of the divine nature. A modern namesake of Saint Theodore's provides striking parallels to this attack on iconoclasm. Theodore Rozak criticizes Western Christianity for limiting the self-revelation of God to the spoken word, as in Judaism, and the Eucharistic gifts, as in iconoclasm. Because God was not seen in any other material objects, the created world was emptied of God. The material world was understood as mere matter, where there is no sacramental consciousness. There is no restraint on scientific analysis and technological exploitation of the cosmos. The desacralized world has become the object of the first true idolatry for those who have lost all awareness of God. Pagan always believed that the gods were more than their images. So a good case can be made that the spiritual sickness of the West, which has spread to so much of the world, had its origin not in Christianity per se, but in a heretical misunderstanding of the Christian doctrine of icons. The translator wishes to thank, for their assistance, a bunch of other clergy and people. This is Catherine P. Roth, San Antonio, Texas, October 1981. One sec. Let me see. I think maybe we're going to cut it there. And if anybody watches this and wants me to go further, I think that introduction actually was a great overall, honestly, short defense of icons in and of itself. But if somebody wants me to continue this on, let me know. I want to see if anybody cares. All right, but thank you all for listening. And who will listen? Let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment section. And make sure to like and subscribe. Talk to you next time.